we have an outdated system. We have a 19th century system for electing people in the 21st century. There are lots of different views. It isn't just Conservative and Labour. There are lots of different views out there. And under a first-past-the-post electoral system, they rarely get any representation in Parliament. Take the Greens. There's a significant number of people in this country who support the Green agenda. I think it's crackers, but that's not the point. Yeah. Lots of people do. They have one MP with no prospect of getting any more. I mean, I led UKIP in 2015 to 4 million votes and 1 seat. Now, never before in the history of the system has anybody got that number of votes and that few seats. That can't be right. And what it does, it says to you, I'm living in a safe Tory seat. I'm living in a safe Labour seat. What is the point on a rainy Thursday of going down to the polling station?
But what's the alternative? Proportional representation, which doesn't that ultimately mean then you are never going to get a solid government? Are you going to have instability?
Depends how you do it. Depends what form of PR you go for. But, you know, the argument against coalitions, look, this country had a coalition from 2010 to 2015. Actually, tell you what, it's a lot more stable than a majority Conservative government's been. And Germany, since 1945, has had perpetual coalitions and yet been a very, very successful country. So I don't buy this argument that coalition government is necessarily bad.
Mm. Do you know, the biggest cry there's going to be today in terms of reforming democracy is from people saying, how is it that we're going to be on our third Prime Minister without there being a general election? You're fighting against that sort of tidal wave of concern before people start looking at, well, how do we measure how we count votes?
In the short term, yes. You know, I mean, here's the odd thing. We kind of vote as if it's a presidential system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet it's not. And members of Parliament who come and sit in this chair and talk to you, who believe they've got their own personal majority, it's for the birds. People voted against Corbyn last time round, for Boris and for Brexit. So we have a very odd system, but I tell you what, over the course of the last few years, support for proportional representation is growing very strongly. It's growing within the Labour Party. Lord Mandelson, for example, now says Labour should move to this system. I think the next general election will be the last one ever contested under pure first-past-the-post. I think a degree of proportionality is coming, and I think it's wanted.
It's interesting. I mean, should there be, at the next election, a Lib-Lab coalition or some Lib-Lab pact, or anything, then that would cement PR, wouldn't it?
That would guarantee it. Yeah, I mean, we had a farce back in 2011 when Nick Clegg agreed to a referendum on a system that wasn't proportional but preferential, which you couldn't explain in a sentence. And I mean, it was ludicrous. One of the worst deals in history. So, yes, I think it is... Look, I mean, yeah, the Tories, there's no chance of them getting back with a majority. And I think this option is going to be on the table and we should talk about it. And frankly, while we're talking about it, let's talk about the House of Lords. You know, I mean, the idea that Liz Truss can appoint people to sit in the House of Lords after 44 days as PM. The whole thing's a farce. So I'm actually all for a complete shake-up of the whole system.
Can I just ask then, I mean, PR, if you're working off a list system, for example, and you can see how it, it reflects democracy, but how does that then help constituencies? Because those constituents are not going to necessarily know or be invested in who they end up with as a Member of Parliament.
So Tony Blair commissioned the late Lord Jenkins to do a huge review of this back in the late 1990s, the Jenkins report. And he said it is an advantage to have a man or woman that represents Guildford, for argument's sake, because people know who the MP is, and when their drains are blocked, that's who they write to. So what Jenkins recommended was something called AV+, 2 ballot papers, one for the man or woman to represent your constituency, and the second, which would be the last 25% of seats in Parliament, for an opinion. And any significant opinion that gets, say, more than 5% of the vote, you know, we don't want hundreds of parties with tiny numbers of votes, any significant opinion then gets into Westminster. So it would be a hybrid with 2 ballot papers, but very easy to explain.
Right.
That's the vision. Let's talk about the vision of politics today, because it's changed very dramatically over the last 4 days, and then even last night again. It looks more than likely that Rishi Sunak's going to be Prime Minister.
It is.
What do you think that means for not just the party?
I'm glad someone in that seat will admit it, Nigel.
What does it mean for the party and for the country? Because Rishi Sunak has got such a tall order in trying to unite the party and persuade the public he can do that.
Look, the personalities, of course, of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak are enormously different. You can believe that Boris Johnson had 102 supporters if you want to. If you really, really want to.
We know about 50 publicly were prepared to say they'd support him, and the others we don't know.
I've never believed a word he said. But what I will say is this. He's a much better campaigner. He appeals more to those more working-class voters in the red wall, without which the Conservatives haven't got a chance. I think Rishi is a disaster as far as those voters are concerned for the Conservative Party. Too detached, too remote, doesn't connect in any way at all. In policy terms, the difference between the two is negligible. You know, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng did at least try to change the direction of our economy. They bungled it, they mishandled it. But what we're going to get with Sunak is the state will get bigger, handouts will get bigger, taxes will go higher, and the same economic model that's failed us for the last 20 years will be maintained.
So what do we do then for the people who... And to be fair, we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails this morning, people saying they will no longer vote Tory because of this. What do they do? I mean, Reform Party?
Well, Reform is going to stand. I mean, Richard Tice has got 500 candidates already. He's going to stand and give it a go. I think he'll get a lot of votes. But under this first-past-the-post system...
It's not going to get...
And that's the real frustration with it. I have to say, if there was an election next month, I think we'd get the lowest turnout of modern times. The level of disenchantment with politics is the highest I can really ever remember it.
Yeah, and which is democracy going wrong, isn't it? If people just think it's a complete waste of time.
Yeah, and if you really look at it now, what are the differences between Labour and the Conservatives? Almost nothing. Almost nothing. On the big issues, they're very, very close together. It's sort of, they're all kind of social democrat parties. But whichever way you cut it, the model isn't working. And I think Sunak, what you'll read in the next few weeks in the Conservative newspapers is stability. But it's stability with a series of policies not connecting. And as I say, I think Sunak's biggest failure will be in the red wall. There is no way he's going to connect.